Uh, the initiation began by the Center for Adivasi Research and Development Initiative Policy Dialogue to address the issues of Global South challenges, nature, culture, language, and identity. This is the international webinar of scholars, activists, policy thinkers, intellectuals, and judicial luminaries. We'll bring shortly one volume about this new shifting paradigm development and discounts. On behalf of the organizers, extend my sincere welcome to all to this very forum of intellectual debate. This Ranjitguru series of international webinar is an initiative by the Department of History and Political Science, Jawaharlal Nehru College, Cuttack, Odisha, in a close collaboration with Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha. I feel extremely delighted to express that we have successfully concluded the 125th round of panel discussion in today's evening. Apart from that, our special initiative policy dialogue on Odisha is gaining prominence since over before. For today's session, I feel extremely honored to invite our guest speakers, who are none other than Professor Kamalakant Mishra, Professor ItzelMexico, Professor Maríade, Torre, and Ms. Jordana. And to moderate this session, we have with us Dr. Samuel Lisa. The broad theme of our international webinar is kept as the Initiative Policy Dialogue 2020 COVID-19 and Live Practice Beyond Pandemic. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Ms. Payal Agarwal, the co-coordinator of this webinar, to initiate the brief introductions of our guests. Over to you, Payal ma'am.
Thanks a lot, Rudra sir, for giving me this honor. I will be extremely delighted to introduce our guest speakers for the current session. First and foremost, a very warm greetings to one and all. Our first speaker is Professor Kamalakant Mishra. He is the former Vice-Chancellor, UtkalUniversity of Culture, Bhubaneswar, and currently serving as the head Department of Anthropology, Hydrabad Central University, India. Sir, thanks a lot for connecting with us. Sir will put his insights on context and relevance of national tribal policy in India. Our next speaker is Professor ItzelMexico. She is a research associate, University of Lathbridge, Canada. Ma'am, we welcome you for today's webinar. Ma'am, your topic is United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement on Labor. Our next speaker is Professor Maria de la Paz, research assistant, University of Lathbridge, Canada. She has specialized in the region of Asia Pacific in the topics of international politics and law, human rights and gender. Ma'am, we welcome you and thanks for being a part of this webinar. Ma'am, your topic as suggested by you is the role of Mexico in the construction of the international public law, peaceful means for the resolution of international disputes. Last but not the least, our guest speaker is Professor Paulette Montserrat. She is an international human rights activist, University of Guadalajara, Mexico. She is a passionate and committed young human rights lawyer, characterized by an eagerness to always learn more. Ma'am will put her insights on reflection on human rights in the COVID-19 pandemic context. I would also like to announce that we have joined with us Dr. Lima. He is the former faculty in history, Relevance University, Cuttack, India. He is also the India member of Indian Public Health Association. He has given his kind consent to be a moderator for this valuable session. I welcome everyone on behalf of this webinar. Now, I would like to stop here and invite Dr. Lima to please carry forward the session. Over to Lima, sir.
Yes. Good evening, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yes. Well, thanks, Professor Chakravarti, Professor Pradhan, Mr. Subham, Payal, and Rudra, and my great mentor, Dr. Bikram K. Sirjana. Now it is my pride and honor to invite our four distinguished speakers who are joining us all the way from North America, particularly Professor Kamalakant Mishra from the United States, Itzel, Maria, and Jordana from Canada. And it's my sincere request to all the speakers, please kindly try to make your respective presentation within, I think, approximately 30 minutes each, so that we can go as timely as possible. After the end of each lecture, there will be a brief 1 to 2 minutes question and answer sessions, so that I request all the fellow participants make your questions in the message box. It is going to be the 127th lecture in this series. The title of the lecture by Professor Mishra, it will be Context and Relevance of National Tribal Policy in India. So without wasting time, it's my heartiest welcome to Professor Mishra to the longest ever lecture series. Over to you, Professor Mishra. Professor Mishra?
First of all, yes. Good evening to friends from India. Good afternoon to those who are joining from Europe. And good morning to all of you those who are joining from North America. Actually, there is a slight miscommunication in the sense that I was told that I would be speaking for about 45 minutes, so accordingly I have prepared my presentation. But anyway, I'll squeeze it to 30 minutes. And so it will be through a PowerPoint presentation. I shall try to. Can you see this now? Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
So we can see
Yes, sir.
Yes. All right. This is on the topic context and relevance of national tribal policy in India. When there are international speakers, I don't know what sense does it make, but then those who are working on Adivasi issues, those who are working on indigenous population in India, I think this has got some bearing on them, because this is, I feel, an urgent issue about tribal policy in our country. As all of us know, recently we had the national education policy. We have different types of, we have health policies, different types of health policies from time to time, but nobody has ever bothered about the national tribal policy in this country. Many of you may be knowing, but then those who do not know, let me tell you the background. It's like this. In the year 2004, the NDA-1 government came up with a draft national policy for the tribes of India. And there was that time, there was a lot of debate, discussion, but then it was never accepted as a national policy. It remained in the draft stage for about 2 years. There was a pressure on the government at that time because the United Nations people was going to an end in 2004, and therefore the government of India was in a hurry to come out with a draft national policy. After that, there was a change in the government. All of us know, we have been following this. In 2006, the UPA-1 government came up with a more elaborate policy and expected comments and suggestions by 10th August 2006. It was there in the website of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs for quite some time. But then, for the reasons best known to the government, the draft document was withdrawn from the website of the Ministry of Tribal Affairs and shelved till today. From 2006 till 2021, there is not a single step that was taken by the government to make it a real policy. But what for a policy document for the tribes of India? This is because there are many constitutional provisions meant for the indigenous population of this country, and there should be a guideline as to how to use these constitutional provisions and also the other kinds of policies, development policies, which are meant for the tribal people. So in order to give a kind of guideline, a policy is always needed. Now, about who are the scheduled tribes in India, I think I should not waste time in going into that, but probably you know that the Constitution of India has never defined what is a tribe in this country. And therefore, there are a lot of ambiguities, there are a lot of problems, there are a lot of people, those who are shouting to become scheduled tribes, and there are a lot of others, those who say that some communities must be taken away from the STs or the scheduled tribes. Now, my job here is just to remind you what was there in the draft tribal policy and how it was to a very large extent unrealistic, and what kind of amendments, what kind of changes that are needed. What I'm talking about is absolutely from my own experience as an anthropologist for well over 4 decades. I've been working among the indigenous people, the tribal people, the Adivasis. So these are all based on my own experience as a worker or a researcher on Adivasi issues. In the draft policy, there are a couple of objectives which have been mentioned. It is said that one of the objectives is to put the tribes on par with the rest of the Indian population in terms of the Human Development Index, in terms of their socio-economic conditions and basic infrastructure facilities in tribal areas. This is one of the objectives. And then behind all these objectives, the idea is to give them regulatory protection, also to enhance their socio-economic and political empowerment, development of their infrastructure, increase livelihood opportunities, improved governance and administration, preservation of cultural and traditional rights and traditional knowledge, protection of intellectual property rights, and access to related privileges. These are mentioned in the objective of the policy, of the draft policy. The draft policy, now we shall discuss the issue by issue, what has been discussed in the policy and how these are to a large extent unrealistic. The policy talks about the alienation of tribal land. All of us know that this has become a big issue in this country. Tribal land is usually grabbed by non-tribal people, and therefore there is a tenurial insecurity among the tribal population of this country. Was there a problem? There was illegal transfer of land to be stopped. The policy says the illegal transfer of land has to be stopped and already alienated land should be restored to the tribal areas. My question to the policymakers is how to do that? Don't you have enough acts? And therefore one more act is necessary or a few more acts are necessary. We have excellent acts. We have the state acts in every state. Wherever there are tribals, we have the acts for alienation of tribal, to stop the alienation of tribal land. I remember in Odisha, it goes back to 1950s when we had, acts to stop the alienation of tribal land to the non-tribal communities. The draft policy says that state laws should be amended in conformity with the PESA Act, the Panchayats and Extension to the Scheduled Areas Act. But my question is, are our Gram Sabhas or Gram Panchayats, for that matter, in a position to understand and implement these kinds of laws? Are they really, empowered? Are they really vigilant about their own rights? This is a question. Indian Registration Act, the draft says the Indian Registration Act has to be amended. But my question is how to stop informal and clandestine transfers. Most of the land alienation is done clandestinely. It is an underhand kind of dealing. It is not really a regular kind of through registration process. Then how to change the culture? When the people believe that I have borrowed some money from the landlord or from the lender, and now that I can't repay, so it is better that let my land go. This is the kind of cultural value of the Adivasis or the tribal people. And they never hesitate to transfer their land like that to the money lenders if they cannot really repay their debts. The policy says that there should be a special fast-track course in scheduled areas. Fine, but then our experience is they are lawyers in today's talk. They know better that as far as indigenous issues are concerned, whatever matter goes to the court, most of the cases go in favor of the non-tribal population. And therefore, even if you set up in scheduled areas, they really do not work much. The draft says provide 1 hectare of land to each family of tribes. Now the question is, which kind of tribes, which kind of STs, what kind of land? Our experience is the government land which is normally given free of cost or in a nominal price to the marginalized communities is always wasteland, and nothing can grow in that. So therefore, although in the policy there will be an mention of distribution of land, what kind of land is given has to be made sure that these lands are made use of by the people to whom the lands are allocated. The draft policy talks about tribal forest. It says the states has to legislate laws to recognize rights of forest dwelling tribal communities, provide ownership of MFPs, then MFPs, minor forest producers, conversion of forest villages into revenue villages, and give rights over water bodies and minerals. My question is that now the act, the FRA, Forest Rights Act, has been implemented, and all of us know that except barring a few states, Odisha is much better. But then I know in case of Tamil Nadu and other states, it was very difficult even to implement prima facie the FRA or the Forest Rights Act, although it was enacted in 2006. Then the draft says to encourage scientific forestry with timber as a byproduct. There is, as an insider, I know pretty well that there is always a fight between the Ministry of Environment and Forest of Government of India and the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. When we say that scientific forestry has to be encouraged, who will take a decision? The tribal ministry has no stake to take a decision in this matter. Normally, the decision is taken by the Ministry of Environment and Forest, and therefore there is the Ministries of Environment and Ministries of Indigenous People or the Tribal Affairs are always at loggerheads in making any policy decision. The draft policy says to do away with the monopoly of the forest corporations. But again, the question is, forest corporations do not come under or do not operate under the tribal affairs. They always operate under the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So therefore, tribal ministry has no control over the forest corporations, and therefore, whatever monopoly or whatever they do, they cannot be controlled. The draft policy says value addition should be done through processing of minor forest producers. The question is, who will handle them? And now, are the tribals empowered, or are the tribals capable of, adding value to their minor forest producers? This question is never asked. And then it says it's unrealistic to expect shifting cultivation as benign as natural forest, the Jhum land or the shifting cultivated land. Now, this ambiguity has to be first cleared about the rights of the forest over their shifting cultivation land. All over the Northeast, all over the central part of India, we find that tribals have been cultivating shifting land, but then without any ownership rights. Is the government prepared to give them ownership rights? And has the FRA increased the livelihood status of the tribes? FRA in most of the states is a failure, as I said, excepting or barring only a few states where some headway has been done. So first of all, one has to strengthen the Forest Rights Act before embarking upon the issues like Jhum land and others. The policy also talks about displacement, rehabilitation, and resettlement. The policy calls for least displacement, conducting social impact assessment, land for land in command areas, suitable compensation, etc., which are very much welcome. In the meantime, all of us know in the year 2013, the Act has been passed, RRA, the Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act. It is too late and too little to solve the endemic tribal problems. After the Act was implemented, there was a lot of debate, if you kindly remember, but then when it was streamlined, even then there are grievances by the tribal people. The Act doesn't mention the need to protect tribal land and community resources in scheduled areas. And there are problems. The problem is in terminologies. There are lawyers, they know much better that we have been inheriting the British phrase or terminology of acquisition of land for quote unquote public purpose. Public purpose. There is another. Excuse me. There is some disturbance. There is another concept which is used. There is another term which is used. It's called eminent domain. So these two, public purpose and eminent domain. Now there are lawyers in this forum. I think they might think over this. There is as long as public purpose and eminent domain remain in the law, I think the people are always helpless and their land are going to be anyway snatched away for whatever reason by saying that it is for public purpose. The draft policy talks about Human Development Index, enhancement of Human Development Index in the field of education, in the field of health, in the field of livelihood, in the field of checking or involuntary migration, unwanted migration, and also it talks about money lending and indebtedness. All are repetitions of the old strategies, and these are without any impact. I suggest that traditional tribal institutions be revived and empowered. Nobody thinks about the traditional institutions. We have already demolished the traditional institutions in the tribal areas, and we have introduced adult franchise. We have introduced new kind of political systems without giving or without caring for their old strategies and their very powerful institutions which existed. We have already bulldozed them, and now we are crying to enhance their Human Development Index. Now, I need not go into the details, but only just the tip in the iceberg is like this. I'll give in the field of education. By class 12, 86% of the tribal children get dropped out from their school. What can you do with this kind of situation? Instead of doing that, why should you go for further kind of policies and all? We have to think about, first of all, how these people could be retained, how these tribal children could be retained. And similarly, infant mortality rate. Let us say the infant mortality rate. There are 62 infant mortality rate for 1,000 live births, which is ridiculous, which is very high. Under 5 mortality rate, 96 children die before the age of 5 years. Out of 1,000, 96 die. Then body mass index, it is much below the average, 18.5. About 49% of women, tribal women, and 40% of tribal men have got a very poor body mass index. Now we have to look at their health from this kind of very realistic point of view, rather than going for policies. So this is the problem with Human Development Index. We might form a policy, but then that policy has to be strengthened with realistic, on the field implementation of their problems and solution of their problems. Critical infrastructure. The draft policy says there should be relaxation of norms for providing infrastructure in tribal areas, and funding should be proportional to the number of or to the percentage of STs. Enhancement of funding under the first proviso of the Article 275(1) of the Indian Constitution. But the question is, have we ever asked what infrastructure do they need? We are imposing on them. We are saying you take schools, you take roads, you take mobile phones, you take television towers, you take electricity, and so on and so forth. But then we are not asking what do they want. And as an anthropologist, as a person in the field, when I ask the people, they say, we want more trees in our forests. Now the forests have become denuded. We want more trees. Isn't it more realistic? They want more games in their forests so that they can hunt and they can get the meat for their livelihood. We want more fish in our rivers and water bodies. Does anybody bother about this? Has anybody thought about this? They want more protection to their standing crops rather than road, school, or electricity. The tribal subplan allocation, I have been noticing that of the tribal populace in the state, except in the state of Chhattisgarh, as you see from this table. In other states, it is much less than the number of or the percentage of the tribal people, although the government of India very categorically says that you allocate your money according to the percentage of tribal people in your state. Now, there are particularly vulnerable tribal groups. They are called PTGs. And then there are TSP strategies. It is better not to talk much about the primitive tribal groups. In our state, in Odisha, for example, there are 13 primitive tribal groups. Their condition is very bad. Even now, although there is a lot of money which is pumped into tribal areas in the name of their development. The problem is, there are also denotified tribes. You must have heard about denotified tribes. And then there is another category called nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes. Their conditions are very, very bad because they are not included under the category of scheduled tribes yet. And they have been rotting as denotified tribes. Earlier they were called criminal tribes, and which is very ridiculous. And in many places now also you find the same term, criminal tribes. Then there is another problem in many states like Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, UP, West Bengal. Although there are PVTGs, but then they do not get the mandated constitutional protection because there are no Schedule 5 areas. And therefore, the benefits of PESA is not applicable for these people. In case of gender equity, I don't have to say much. The policy says that already it makes a kind of statement that tribal women are better placed. I don't understand in which way the tribal women are better placed. But then if only the PESA is implemented properly, and the kind of provisions that have been made in the PESA about the tribal women, that would be more enough in empowering the women among the tribal population. Their traditional knowledge. It says that the draft policy says that the tribal arts and craft are to be preserved. Each state capital should have Adivasi Bhavan. Then it says to preserve, promote and document the varied tribal knowledge, and training has to be given to the youth and disseminate these knowledge. But then I feel that there is an inherent contradiction in the policy. On the one hand, the objective is to bring them to the mainstream, and on the other, to preserve their culture. Now the question is, how to preserve their culture when you bring them to the mainstream? You have to sacrifice something. If you bring them to the mainstream, definitely a part of their traditional culture has to be sacrificed. Otherwise, they cannot be brought to the mainstream. Tribal knowledge is not monolithic, and it changes with time. Like any other knowledge, our knowledge has also undergone tremendous change, like the cyber knowledge that we have. Unless this knowledge is linked to basic survival needs, it is difficult to preserve a useful knowledge if it is linked to the survival strategy. A useful knowledge perpetuates, is the natural law. So therefore, we have to see which knowledge can feed them, and that knowledge has to be protected with care. A thorough research in this direction is needed. The administration of tribal areas also, it says that that scheduled areas, constitution of advisory councils, probably you know that how shabbily advisory councils are constituted in many states, including the state of Odisha. The chief minister becomes the chairman of the committee, and chief ministers normally don't have enough time to spare for the tribal advisory council meeting, and therefore not many things are implemented in the tribal areas which the tribal advisory council has to do. Then regulatory and protective regimes like the Excise Laws, Land Acquisition Act, Prevention of Atrocities Act, and other central acts are to be modified in conformity with the PESA. In some states this has been done, in some other states it is yet to be done, and therefore a lot of work in this direction has to be, is still pending. Scheduling and descheduling of the tribe, as we know, this is a political issue. It is very difficult from my own experience, and probably you can also join with me in saying yes, that it is very difficult to deschedule any community for that matter. Forget about the tribes. Can you really deschedule a tribe and bring them to the, to say that they are descheduled? Then scheduling of the tribe, there is always a demand, but then there is a very lengthy process. The state government has to propose, it has to go to the Registrar General of Census, then it has to go to the National Commission, and then it will go to the Parliament, and finally the President will declare. So this is a very lengthy process, but then there are many communities, those who are getting listed into or enlisted as STs. The list goes on every day or every month, which is not a very healthy sign. Research, training and communication, it says the tribal research institutes should be given more responsibilities, but all of us know that the tribal research institutions are controlled by administrators, not by academics, and the director is always answerable to his or her secretary and commissioner and the minister, but not really to the tribal population. So what kind of outcome do you expect? It says there should be a National Institute for Tribal Affairs. So far, it has not been done. When Joël Laurent was the Minister for Tribal Affairs, I had written a couple of letters to him. I had met him personally, and I had pleaded that the best place to establish this National Institute will be Bhubaneswar. He said yes, but then nothing was done. Now, monitoring, evaluation and review, it says powers are to be given to the local communities to monitor and oversee the implementation of the programs. But all of us know this will go to the elite among these local communities, not really the common people or the common tribals, because they are so unaware of the things. And therefore, all these things will be only in paper and nothing else. My concluding observations are like this. The objectives and guidelines are theoretically very, very progressive. But how to ensure effective implementation? There is no guideline as to how to ensure implementation. Who will be answerable in case of the failure? In case so much of money is spent, but nothing happens. So far, nobody answers why there was a failure. So somebody has to be made answerable. How empowered are our communities to be? This is a constitutional responsibility, whether our tribal people are properly empowered. Are they knowledgeable to take up their own issues? Had it been so, there was no need of any policy whatsoever. They would have probably done their job and they would have got whatever they deserve to get. Integration or assimilation is not required unless the people voluntarily prefer to do so. This has been very clearly told in 1956, none other than by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who said that it has to be voluntary. If the people want to integrate, let them integrate or assimilate. Don't force them. But now our policy is to force them to come to the mainstream, which is very, very suicidal. How to ensure local participation in the development programs. How to ensure protection of tribal rights as per many international policies in matters of preservation, promotion and revitalization. This is a real burning question that we have to ask ourselves. And I feel that even if a tribal policy comes tomorrow or day after tomorrow, it should not be another top-down policy document as we have been doing in case of tribal subplan and other kinds of things. I thank you very much. I had to, gloss over many of the things. I thought I should discuss threadbare because there may be many people, those who may not be aware of the implications of a tribal policy, but then because of the time constraint, I could not really do much. I apologize for that. I thank you. I thank the organizers for having invited me, and this was a wonderful opportunity of meeting friends and talking to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, for beautifully you explained the tribal policy in India. There are some of the questions. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I can hear you. But
Yes.
should we take up the
Yes.
questions right now? Or
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
okay, okay. Please go
Okay.
ahead. Please go.
There are some of the questions. A question by Dr. Bikram Kesarjana. He's asking
Yes.
basically, what is your idea on doctrine of equality and public trust doctrine? Its contradictions with Adivasi development disconnects in global south, particularly in Odisha.
Could you please repeat it?
Yes. What is your idea on doctrine of equality and public trust doctrine? Its contradictions with Adivasi development disconnects in global south, particularly in Odisha.
As far as I understand the question, it is something about equality. See, the problem here, I have been repeatedly telling that the people, those who demand equality, are they demanding equality? If they are demanding equality, are they capable of, demanding their rights or taking away, snatching away their rights? Unless we empower them, the question is how to empower them. Unless we empower them, probably it would be very difficult to think of all these big things like equality and all. First of all, let us train them, let us empower them, and then only they will claim or they will demand the equality for their selves, and we don't have to do much about it. I think I have understood and answered. If I have not, then please send me a mail and I'll reply it. Any other question, please? Is there any other question? If there is a question, please send it to my mail and to my email.
Yes, sir. Sir,
Please go ahead.
Question.
Please go ahead.
This question is asked by Subham Das, myself. So, what is the role of Odisha academicians to understand the plight of these Aboriginal people and fight for these disadvantaged and downtrodden sections of our society in protecting their language, identity, culture, forest right, and land rights?
Wonderful. Here is a problem. The problem is the schism. The problem is the division of job. Academics think they can only read, write, and teach. They don't have anything to do with activism. So they think that it is left to the national and international NGOs to fight for the indigenous or the tribal people. But my view is slightly different. I think an academic also should be an activist, because an academic knows what are the implications of every single thing, and therefore he knows better how to handle the things. But this has never happened. Those who are activists, they do not know much about, they don't have much idea about the reality. And those who know the reality, they are not the activists. So there is a schism, there is a discontinuity between the jobs of an academics and an activist, particularly in this state of, all over India, not only in the state. And academics think they only can read, write, and teach. They have nothing to do with activism. So that is the reason why we are unable to address many of these very important issues relating to the indigenous and the tribal people of this country.
Sir, another question
Yes,
by
Rudran Das had a question.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yes,
Please
Rudran Das is asking you about LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization has impoverished and plundered tribals in a devastating way.
Yes.
He's asking, do you any alternative model of inclusive development for tribals?
Absolutely. There are models, there are possibilities. I don't say there are models, there are possibilities. For example, first of all, let me make it very clear that this LPG is irreversible, whether you like it or not. This is irreversible. We cannot really go back. We have to go forward. And the tribes have also to go along with the mainstream, along with this LPG. and therefore inclusive development is a must. There are possibilities. Say, for example, today, why the Indian farmers are on strike? Because their genuine grievances are not really addressed. Everything is in terms of money, everything is in terms of capital, and therefore probably the best thing will be that there should be a local area development agency at the block level, at the panchayat level, which can see the strengths and weaknesses of the local tribal population and accordingly link them to the market. I think that is the only alternative. I have already discussed this in my presentation. I said we are talking about, the MFP, minor forest produce, and their processing. For processing industry, there should be a technically knowledgeable person. So we have to train the people to become technically sound. I have seen in case of Andhra Pradesh, for most part of my life, I was in Andhra Pradesh, undivided Andhra Pradesh, particularly in tamarind, in tribal areas, we have got large number of tamarind trees. Earlier, traders used to come and take away all the tamarind during the harvest season. But then now, some of the tribals in some places, they are processing tamarind and selling it at a much higher price. So similarly, there are many other things. We know resources are not really constrained in this country. Everywhere there are resources. Only we need to train the local people so that they make use of the local resources and then take the benefit out of it.
Professor Mishra, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Actually, I have three. Good evening. I have three questions, and you can just make a single answer for that.
Yeah.
The thing is that, already, sir, you are a professor, and many other students must have done PhD under you.
Yes.
All over India, every year, perhaps 15 to 20 theses are submitted, tested. You know the process very well.
Yes.
But I am astonished and surprised. Out of them, 90% of the PhD candidates, they never visit the area where the tribals live.
Exactly.
And just they guess and they submit the theories.
Right.
And we, the universities, we, the professors, sir, please forgive me, but it is not intentional.
No.
I am talking in a general.
No.
That how we accept it, how we get the theory received, and we just praise that, okay, it's a very perfection thing.
Yes.
And sir, second question is that all over these periods from the independence era up to now,
yes,
I think many other participants, and also sir, you have remembered in +2 education, one
yes,
topic on that tribal living has been given, and those who belong to Indonesia or some other areas, not of
yes,
Indian context or of our tribals who live in Odisha. It
right,
is one of the very surprising thing that we
right,
should not know our people. We should not know about the people of Australia and America.
right, right,
So, and the third thing, when we are talking about, is this social exclusion, or is this the exclusion of civilization just by sparing the civilization or make it into pieces, and we see, okay, this is my tribe and that is your tribe. And the third thing is that in Parliament, when Mandal Commission was there, sir, you might have remembered, many others. So whenever there was the reservation policy came, so one thing, one member of Parliament told at that time, that past 50 years you have tortured them. Now the time has come, you feel that torture. This process of but or accepting or getting tribals into mainstream of our country, if this process will go on, or like this, if it will go on, then I think we have to just face the same danger or same problem again. So one question, sir, I want to know that why is it necessary that we should bring them to the mainstream? Why can't we go to them? Why can't we accept them?
yeah.
Sir, please, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. First, the last question first. All over the world, if you see, wherever there is a hegemonic rule, in my mind, I have United States, also Australia. First of all, we demolish the indigenous communities and their culture. First, we demolish them very mercilessly. I have visited so many indigenous reserves. In USA they call reserves, like in Andaman we have got one reserve called Jarva Reserve, the single reserve in the whole country. So here there are reserves, and there I see there are small museums which depict the history of the tribal people. First of all, when the Europeans came, they took shelter under them, they took their food, and then mercilessly killed them, threw them in the river. And after some time they realized that probably their culture was better. They were our host when we first came from Europe, and we should revive their culture. Now they have started reserve business, and they are really clamoring to get back their culture, but this is not possible. In India, we are exactly doing the same thing. The issue was raised again and again. First of all, we are saying in the name of civilizing them, in the name of bringing them to the mainstream, we are very systematically, killing their culture from the root. And now we are trying to get the culture back. And this is a real contradiction. We have to understand, if a community wants, I have already said, even Nehru also said, I said in 1956, he gave a speech in Jagdalpur, and that was called the Nehruvian Panchashil. 5 principles he had said. And the last principle was that if the people want, tribal people want, then bring them to the mainstream, whatever they want. If they want to give up their old habits or old culture and take up a new culture, please do that. Otherwise, don't force them. It is none of your business to force anything on them. And all our policy all through are the top-down policies. Somebody thinks in Delhi, somebody thinks in Bhubaneswar, and things are implemented on the poor tribal people, those who are living in the remote parts of this country, without implementation. I have got a lot of experience about this, but now that time will not permit, otherwise I would have explained to you. There was a scheme called the milk cattle scheme, if you remember, for the tribal people, that the government one day decided, one very brilliant bureaucrat thought that we will give one cow and a calf to a family so that the family will get milk and will become rich overnight. And it was given to the tribes, those who are basically beef eaters. And after 2 weeks, when the government officials visited to evaluate, they found not even a single cow or calf was left. Somebody said, tiger has eaten away. Somebody said, washed away in the river, and so on and so forth. All kinds of excuses were given. But we are giving something to a beef eating community, and we milk cattle or cow and then sell the milk in the market to become economically independent. So this is our policy. It is always a top-down policy, and therefore all our policies are failure. Let me very frankly say, money is not constant in this country. So much of money has been spent in the name of tribes. The other question you said about an ethical question. People are not really willing to go to the field to look at the tribes, but then they write their thesis. This is the problem with both the teachers as well as the taught. It is in mutual agreement. There are teachers, I can't generalize. There are teachers, those who say, no, my students have to go for at least 1 year, at least I say my students, at least 1 year continuous field work in one particular village. I'm an anthropologist. We always believe in empiricism. We always believe in ethnography. So therefore I say, unless the ethnography is strong, the outcome cannot be better. So therefore I always insist 1 calendar year, let us say from 1st January till 31st December, my student has to be in the field. He or she cannot come out. Otherwise, please go to some other person. I am not willing to supervise. So this is an ethical question, and that is the reason why the knowledge has become shallow. The outcome also, as you see, there have been schemes over schemes, but then the people remain the same. There is not much of improvement. Thank you for your observation. It was very genuine. I share it. Thank you. If there is
any question from anybody?
If there is no question, I again thank you so much.
Just
Yes, please. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
There is a question from Aniruddha.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
If he may go beyond your session and seek your understanding of larger politics of culture and mainstreaming projects that's being sponsored by the state and its agencies, as academics and researchers, how should we approach to understand and address key questions of indigenous culture, identity and knowledge?
First of all, we have to understand what is culture. It is a much abused concept. Let me tell with all my grief that culture is the most abused concept. Everybody uses culture. Politician, when gives a political talk, he talks about culture. Academics talk about culture. Journalists talk about culture. But what is culture? Has anybody really understood that? Culture is so integral to the human society. It is an integral part of the human society, and this culture is, linked to the societal values. First of all, we have to understand that, and accordingly, we have to devise whatever we want to do, whether policies or whatever we have to do. So therefore, first of all, let us understand culture, and for understanding culture, it needs deep insight. It needs real interaction in real time and space with the people who possess the culture, and then only we can think of something. I think if there is no other question, thank you so much.
I think it will be the last question by Bijay Sahu. He's asking why tribal language is not monolithic.
Like all languages, I think this is a very larger question, and probably it will take more time. Why it is not monolithic? It is not, for that matter. Why should we talk about tribal language? For any language for that matter, it is not monolithic. Like culture is, one of the definitions of culture is that it changes, and similarly the definition of language, it has to change. If it doesn't change, then it ceases to be a language. It changes over time, and there are many reasons for this. Sometimes there are external forces which bring about changes, and there are some internal forces that also are responsible for change in the language, and therefore no language is monolithic. I'll give one example each. From external, as we know that English is engulfing most of the languages of the world. We are more becoming anglicized, Take of any language for that matter, slowly getting anglicized. And similarly, look at the dictionaries, English dictionaries. You will find more and more local terms getting into the English dictionaries over time. So there is always a kind of external force, external pressure. How syllable we are, unless we speak English. Why Indian people are more acceptable in the United States and Australia? There is compared to Chinese, because probably they speak English better. So this is the external force, and the internal force is sometimes people feel that our language is not really worth it the moment we move out of our linguistic boundary. The moment we come out of our linguistic boundary, we cannot communicate. So therefore people think that our language is not worth it. And this I have seen, I have talked to many tribal communities, those who are forgetting their own language or dialect. I don't say language, because language is always supported by a script. The spoken language is called dialect. They forget their dialect. by this territory. If I say Santali, or if I speak a Saura language, no understand. Therefore, we are bound to the kind of communicative language, like Pidgin, or Creole, so that other people can understand what I say. And therefore, I don't subscribe to the view that any language for that matter, whether tribal or non-tribal, is not monolithic. It undergoes and it could be an internal drive of the people, a conscious decision of the people to change so that they are better accessible outside their limits. Any other question?
This is the last question by Anuruddh Jena, Hyderabad University.
Yes, please.
He's asking to agree that anthropologists with their conventional ethnographic approach have seriously failed the tribal community in terms of representing them adequately and
Here is what we mean by ethnography, how we do ethnography. Be a good ethnography, there could be a bad ethnography. If the ethnography is bad, we are not representing the community properly because we don't understand the community. If the ethnography is good, we have understood the community and then we are representing the community well. This is the answer. It depends on us. If we are practicing ethnography, what kind of ethnography we are doing. Or let me put it, an honest ethnography and a dishonest ethnography. So there are many dishonest ethnographers also. It's like a community. You can't blame really anybody. It's like a community. In any community you find there are some good people, some bad people. Similarly, among the anthropologists, there are some good ethnographers, some bad ethnographers. And bad ethnographers, obviously, they have a very meager idea about the community. So how do they represent? How can they represent? Because they don't know themselves. Therefore, a good ethnography is required to represent a community before outside, because it depends on the person who does ethnography. I think I have answered to your satisfaction. Otherwise, please send your question to my email, and I would request the organizers to take my email and distribute among the participants. If they still have some questions, please send your questions to my email. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for giving me this.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and enlightened us about the national tribal policy in India. Again, thank you for being with us. I think, shall we move to another speaker? It will be the lecture number 128 by ItzelMexico.
Hi. Nice to be here.
ItzelMexico, yes.
Thank you.
Yes. ItzelMexico, the research associate of the University of Lathbridge, Canada. She has joined us all the way from Canada, and the title of the lecture will be United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement on USMCA level. Welcome to you, ItzelMexico.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Mishra. It was amazing. So I will start. I will be brief to everyone to understand. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat. I will share the presentation I have. So let me do it. Well, can you see my presentation already?
Not yet. Oh yeah,
Not
right
yet.
now. Oh yeah, right now. I can see it.
Thank you. So I will talk about the specific chapter 23 about the UMSCA, which is the convention between Mexico, United States, and Canada. It's a great deal for all the three countries. So many deficiencies about NAFTA. So here's the important thing about why we are talking about this and right now. This happened this year, 2020, and for Mexico it was a big deal because it has to change all the laws about labor. As I was searching for the Indian labor policy, it's pretty similar to Mexico and very different about Canada and United States. But let me explain. Why is important Chapter 23? The United States, Mexico, and Canada have agreed to a labor chapter that brings labor obligations into the core of the agreement, makes them fully enforceable, and represent the strongest provision of any trade agreement before. So this changed the game for every country about the labor rights that protect by the international agreements. And here are the things that we need to focus. First, freedom of association and effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. This is supposed to be, every since I have memory, protected, but it's never had. The people do not have this right until now, and it's tangible and you can see it. And the second thing is the elimination of all forms of forced and compulsory labor, and the effective abolition of child labor and prohibition of the worst form of child labor and other labor protection for children and minors. This is important because in Mexico it's common that the child labor is done, and even though that the Constitution prohibits, it's not legal. It happens. Sadly, it happens. Fourth, the elimination of discrimination in respect of the employment and occupation. I mean, even though we are in the 21st century, women do not have the same payment as the men. And this is a big problem in Mexico and United States. Canada has erased some discrimination about gender, but not completely. And fifth and final, accepting conditions of the respect of minimum wage and the health and safety. This is very important for me because I have been working in this some years, and I saw that labor rights are not respected, especially safe and healthy. People work without the minimum, and there are some problems. I think this is the part we think that you can interesting. International Labor Organization, ILO, has 3 topics in this chapter. And the first is Declaration of the Social Justice for Fair Globalization. And I will be talking about it some minutes. It was the values of principles embodied in the ILO constitutions are reinforced to meet the challenge of the 21st century, which is non-discrimination and today, home office. Right now, what we are doing in this session is home office. And the laws of the Constitution are not today problem since happened COVID-19. Paulette will talk about it later in human rights, but labor is a human right. And we are here and we are not protected as it should be about stress, about some problems, mental problems, health, and physical health that comes to be in home so many times without going out, without not meeting people, can exercise outside. And it reflects an ill confidence in the relevance of the vision and managed, as well as fully committed to assume its contemporary responsibilities, like elimination of child labor. And this is very important. I will invite you to read it after some time. And after that, we have the ILO Declaration of Fundamental and Principles on Right at Work. It's the base of every labor right, and it commits member states to respect and promote principles and rights in 4 categories, whether or not they have ratified the relevant conventions. And I will show you later how Mexico and Canada and United States and India has been, it's a member of the ILO, and what are the topics they ratify. And finally, but not least important, worst forms of child labor convention. This is a topic that has a strong meaning in this chapter, considering that the effective elimination of the worst forms of child labor requires immediate and comprehensive actions. I mean, we listen from the doctor that the children do not have free basic education. And this is the part that we have been so much lucky to have, because it changed. Education changed life. And this is part of the concern from, if they are working, they can study. But the dressing and the families are part of it, and they will provide the rehabilitation and social integration. So it could happen. And here it is, the ratification. Well, Mexico has 81 conventions. They have the fundamental conventions, the governance conventions, and technical. They are very technical. The United States, it's not so committed. It has 14 conventions only. Canada, 37. Fundamental conventions complete. Governance conventions mostly. And technical conventions some. But in Canada, I think it's the country that has more covered the rights of labor. And India has 47 conventions and 1 protocol. I mean, you guys have so much lucky, more than the United States. And I think it's important to note that the ratifications are a must-have. So if the country ratifies these conventions, it has to apply it in the local constitution and laws to make it happen. If not, its declarations are not a must. It's more like should do or could do. So workers' representation in collective bargaining in Mexico is the chapter 23A, because it's just for Mexico. And it's pretty interesting because the United States do not have this thing, and neither do Canada. But it provides the right of workers to engage in concerted activities for collective bargaining or protection, and to organize, form, join, union of their choices, and prohibit employer domination and interfering in union activities, discrimination, or concerning against workers' unions activities. This is important because I have been working in unions in Mexico, and it happens. The employers interfere. The workers never have the rights. So to establish and maintain independence and impartial bodies to register union elections and resolve disputes is very important. We have to divide it into an independent entity for concealing and registration for union and collective bargaining agreements, and independent labor courts. It is working. It's not complete in all Mexico. It's just 2 states right now from all the country, but it will be in 3 years complete. So, and provide its labor laws through legislation, as I said. If a country ratifies it, it has to be in the laws of the country. So I will bring you these links so you can read everything I explain if you want to, and I will show you the page, I think, which is for me pretty interesting since yesterday I was reading it. So you can read about Forced Labor Convention, Equal Remuneration Convention, Abolish of Forced Labor Convention and Discrimination, Minimum Age and Worst Form of Child Labor Convention. Mexico, United States, Canada, and India have this one, especially to complete and eliminate child labor. It's our responsibility as lawyers and as citizens to complete and to search about that. And international law, and this is all about Vienna Convention and the Love Treaties. That means that if you ratify as a country these conventions, you are obligated to do it. So I will read some of the questions that you have been here putting. Paz Venega asks, how could we use the labor hazard and insecurities of informal economy in Mexico highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic to create a better and fairer legislation? Well, the legislation is excellent. Mexico has one of the best legislation in labor. The problem is that we don't use it. We have so much. We have the first constitution that was social rights, but since the COVID-19 pandemic is here, home office is a real thing. Right now, the Congress has been putting some work about changing things and regulating home office. So I think next year will be a law. So we will be here talking about that. And Imran asks, what if the reduced policy uncertainty is excluded from the model? The UCIT estimates that the net impact of UNSCA on the economy is actually negative, or approximately a loss of US, to 22.6 billion. This is due to the new provisions that will actually reduce trade in North America. What could be changed possibly on this? Well, let's remember Mexico is part of North America as Canada, but the important thing is, yes, United States is losing money, but also is gaining force in labor hands. Forced labor is in Mexico. Everything happens here. You can search, and Toyota and Ford was here. Ford is a complete big motor company that is here, and is not losing. He's winning. And Mexico, I think, since I'm here, is losing. The NAFTA, which was the last trade between these three countries, was a big problem, because in Mexico, when it happens, it changed to neoliberalism, and it changed topic about human rights. And it happens something that it's called ItzelMexico, which is some people of Chiapas, which is the south of Mexico, that are indigenous people, talk about the NAFTA as a bad thing, and they suffer the consequences about poverty, changes in the land, about so many problems that Paulette can talk you about human rights later. And I think India and Mexico has some of the problems similar because they have so much land, and some parts are so rich and some parts are so poor, and they are completely different. So we will search and can talk about it to complete with comparative law, which I love. Comparative law will make you understand that we have so much similarities between us. So thank you very much, and I will search and give you my email and this presentation so you can read it. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here, and but I have no words. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ItzelMexico. But you have a number of questions, but out of many, I'll ask one or two questions for you. A question by Paj Venegasde asking, how could we use the labor hazards and insecurities of informal economy in Mexico highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic to create a better and fairer legislation?
As I was saying, this legislation will change in the next year. It will be completely new about home office. So it will regulate about how you can work from your house, and still they can pay you, and they will pay about light, internet, so many things, health, mental health especially. So Mexico is improving, but it's not perfect, and still is working on it. We are working on it. It's new. We have been in COVID-19 1 year.
Thank you so much, Itzel. You presented about US-Mexico-Canada agreement on labor, and thank you. Thank you for being with us. I think we should move to another lecture. Maria is here. Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Maria? Yes, okay. It's my pride and honor to welcome you to the longest ever series of the Ranjitguru Memorial Lecture. It is going to be the 129th lecture, and Maria is the Associate Research Assistant of the University of Lathbridge, Canada. The title of the lecture is The Role of Mexico in the Construction of the International Public Law, Peaceful Means for the Resolution of International Disputes. So, welcome you to this lecture, Maria. Over to Maria.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. And actually, it brings me a lot of joy and a lot of pride to talk about this topic, because I think this is one thing that Mexico, because of his background history and actually, well, our cultural, social, political background, can bring into the international, well, the constitution of the international public law, and to bring some changes that will make it better, that will make it fairer, that will bring justice to the international public law. So thank you so much, and I will be sharing my presentation in a few seconds. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Well, as I was saying, The topic that I'm going to discuss today is the role of Mexico in the construction of international public law, and I will be specifically talking about peaceful means for the resolution of international disputes. Well, this is an historical and documented resource in international law. I just talk about this topic because I think it's really important to have it in mind and to go and just review it, review the practice, review what we're doing about this, and just like generate the conditions so this international law has the a way to be to have a guaranteed and pure application without any kind of discrimination towards a certain country, group, or even individuals. So this topic is still relevant, and even though it can be seen like as an historic topic, we have to keep it in mind right now, and it's really, really relevant in the present because it is a call for respect and find peaceful means of cooperation, international cooperation, even in situations where the conflict is the background that we're having right now. So in these situations, it's important that neither of the parts in the conflict result in disadvantage. So actually, this is a call for respect and a call for plurality and just like bring peace to everyone. So actually, this principle of international law is discussed in the UN Charter, actually in the Article 1, where it says that the purposes of the United Nations are to maintain international peace and security, and to bring about, by peace means, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to breach the peace. So actually, to cover all the topics that the UN Charter is bringing us in this particular article, we will have to sit and really think and talk and like a thinking community, not just like one person just expressing what they think about. What peace means. We really need to discuss what peace means. But for purposes for this presentation and time-related situations in these presentations, we will focus on the topic of peace as the cultural, social, and political well-being of a certain country, group, or individual. So actually, for this topic, I think that it's really important that we bring about the historical background of the nations, the groups, or even individuals that we are talking about. So as I was telling you, this topic calls for a vision of respect and plurality, and really respect the differences and just not like imposing power over the other actor, trying to solve the problem. So actually, I think these two theories that are on the screen right now, the feminist theory of international relations and the decolonial feminist theory in international relations, are really important when we're talking about this topic. And what the feminist theory in international relations tells us is that international politics are never neutral. They are always based in power relations, and these power relations are so influenced by gender relations that they create hierarchical and unequal relations. So we're talking about asymmetrical power relations, where one country or one international actor assesses its power and superiority over the other actors or the other countries. So we have to really dismantle those violent structures for us to be able to talk about a fair and a just international law. So for the decolonial feminist theory in international relations, I think this is really important, and actually I was reminded by some things that Itzel said in her presentation, and the professor that talked first, where he talked about tribal rights and tribal situations in India. And why is that? Because the decolonial feminist theory in international relations tells us that we have to find this contra-hegemonic and contra-cultural theory that will bring us like the context to really critically think about our reality and erase the violent structures in a local, national, and international level. So just to give you an example of asymmetrical power in the international context, we can talk about the UN Security Council, where 5 countries have a higher position, like a higher decision-making power over the other 100 plus countries. So yeah, what the decolonial feminist theory in international relations brings us is this concept that tells us that pluralism is the key, respect over the other's cultures and the other's situations, the other's history is the key. So this theory actually focuses on being a decolonial theory that wants to dismantle all these power asymmetrical structures that the colonization period by Spain left us, but also they want to, well, they are giving us like the concepts to really think about neo-colonial structures that are really imposing on us and really oppressing us even to this day. So this theory is actually the patriarchal tool and anti-classist and anti-racist. So we've talked about a lot these peaceful means of resolution of international conflicts, but what are those? What are these peaceful means of resolution? Well, actually, we have these 2 categories of means of resolution of international conflicts: the diplomatic and political means that are direct negotiation, good offices by a third party, mediation by, well, a neutral mediation by a third party, and investigation and a conciliation where a third party investigates, analyzes the situation, and brings a sentence, a non-binding sentence over the conflict, and the 2 actors in dispute will take that sentence and really just discuss it and work it together. And by the other hand, we have the legal mean of arbitration. In contrary to the diplomatic means of resolution of international conflicts, the arbitration is legally binding, which means that the sentence that comes out of here, of this court, that it can be a permanent court or it can be a sui generis court. So actually, that sentence that those courts bring are obligatory. And just to go back a few seconds ago, where I was talking about asymmetrical power relations and structures and violent structures of power in the international relations, I really think that those 2 topics really go together and really combine, in the sense that if we are not able to really have these structures of power erased, these violent structures erased, these peaceful means of resolution of international conflicts need, because we are just using another form of coercion, because we are using our power, maybe our soft power, maybe a political, military, economic power to resolve the conflict. So what we're really talking about with this peaceful means of resolution of international conflicts is that we have to have like an equal base and an equal vision to really resolve the international conflicts without benefiting one of the actors for other reason that is not international public law. So actually, well, why do I talk about the role of Mexico in really creating and just are actually the right to self-determination, the non-intervention, the peaceful solution of controversies, that if we remember is actually the topic that we're talking right now, allowing the use of force of trade in international relations. So we are talking of a really peaceful way of seeing foreign policy in a respectful way. Actually, they are talking about equal rights of states. So we are talking of that wanting of dismantling those oppressive and violent structures in international relations that keep this asymmetrical structure of power going in the international system. Actually, we talk about international cooperation for development too, the respect, protection, and promotion of human rights, and the struggle for international peace and security. So what is important to note about this specific article about the, well, in the Mexican Constitution is that these guidelines are not like for all the country and for each Mexican individual or something like that. Actually, these guidelines are for the president of the republic. So actually, the president is obliged by the Constitution to really follow these guidelines and really bring in into foreign policy these principles. And one thing that I want to highlight too is that the Mexican Constitution is the only constitution in the world that talks about the peaceful resolution of controversies in their legislation. So that is what we want to really highlight about Mexico. As Itzel was talking in her presentation, the legislation of Mexico is incredible. It's really nice. It brings us some really important topics about social, civil, human rights, labor rights. Actually, the Mexican Constitution and the Mexican legislation in general is really rich. What we are lacking of is in the practice stage of the legislation. So I really wanted to talk about this topic with the feminist decolonial theory of international relations, because it brings into the table the importance to really see the context, the historical context that the countries have, to really understand the situation and to really understand their legislation, their rights, actually just like the context in general. So here we have some Mexican doctrines that helped to shape and strengthen international law here in Mexico. So actually, what happened with these doctrines is that actually the history and the context that we were living in each of these presidencies really shaped the way that these doctrines were created. For example, for the Juarez doctrine, it establishes the equality between nations. And why was that? It was because we were just getting out of the period of colonization by Spain, and we were confronting some international situation that were putting the internal politics and the external foreign relations really in danger. We had the U.S. trying to intervene in the internal politics. We had France wanting to just establish a government here. So we had like a lot of interventions in that time. So Juarez doctrine really wanted to bring this equality between nations vision. So actually one phrase that is really talked about and is really famous about Juarez is among individuals as and among nations, the respect of the rights of others is peace. And that is actually, that is bringing into the conversation the question about peace, the question as peace as the right of not being disturbed either in the cultural, social, political, individual context. So it just talks about respect and about autonomy, about sovereignty, and actually all of these concepts are compilated in the colonial feminist theory of international relations. So for Carranza doctrine, it establishes the principle of no intervention by foreigners in the national and international affairs, and as well as the equality between nations and between people. So here with Carranza, we had like a lot of foreign individuals that wanted to come into the country and really take our resources and just make it theirs. And this Carranza doctrine is really important because it is telling us that our country is ours. There's no right of other current foreign actors to come and just dictate what we need to do, just steal our resources. Like, our country is ours, as in the first lecture they were talking about. Like, we have to respect the tribal communities. We have to respect the local communities to really talk about well-being and peace of those communities. Because if we just keep intervening and keep trying to dictate what is right for the local communities, we are just exerting these structures of power that were left in the country by that colonial period. So for Estrada doctrine, actually this is really important because it is telling us that we would not use the recognition as another local government of another local government as a form of international pressure or coercion. Actually, what was happening here is that the United States constantly used this resource of recognition of our government to just like really as a coercion method. Like, if they wanted us to change the legislation, the constitution, the application of the constitution in a certain way, they would just say, I'm not going to recognize you until you make that change. So with the Estrada doctrine, we said, no more. We are not giving you the power of deciding what is best for us and what we should do so you can benefit from that. So actually, this is kind of my favorite doctrine out of these five. For the Azardas doctrine, it actually is like a ramification from Estrada doctrine, and it is telling us that we would maintain a neutral position in international conflicts, no matter the political nature of the belligerent countries. So the historical context of what's happening here is that the United States and Cuba were like fighting. We know that part of the history, and the United States requested Mexico to just go against Cuba and just really get in the side of the United States. Sorry. So we, as a peaceful country in international relations, decided to maintain neutral, and actually we serve to this peaceful means of resolution of conflicts, because during all that time, Mexico served as a mediator between the United States and Cuba without intervening. So actually, from the Estrada doctrine, we can talk about that we were not just looking at autonomy and sovereignty like for us. We were reclaiming that respect and sovereignty of all nations equally. So the last doctrine that we can talk about is the Fox doctrine. And actually this doctrine talks about that we should defend and promote human rights all over the world. And this is not in like a neo-colonialist manner. We're talking about the plurality and about respecting each other's culture, each other's tradition, each other's just like background, to really bring about the best of the human rights, and really using human rights to promote and really guarantee the well-being of the people, and not just like to say this is human rights and you should have this to be able to call yourself a country who protects the human rights. No, we have to really see the context of the country and really see what is like the human rights that we really need to prioritize in said country, to really talk about that we are promoting human rights and not just like imposing them. Because one thing that the feminist decolonial theory of international relations tells us is that whenever we impose something, we are just repeating those structures of asymmetrical power that we were left by the colonial period. Sorry. So what we should really aim is to respect each other's autonomy and really just not imposing like it can be a political system, a cultural, I don't know, traditions. It could be an economic system. We should not impose those, because if we impose those, we are talking about violent structures of power. So as a form of conclusion, we really want to say that, as I said in the presentation, Mexico really has like a really strong base that we can just work in and just like cleaning and work with it to really bring the best of the international law to our country, like to Mexicans and individuals, and even towards our foreign policy, as I was talking about. The thing is that the legislation is perfect. It's really nice. It's really hopeful if we read it. But when we see the practice and the reality of Mexicans, we see that we still have those patriarchal structures that keep oppressing us, not only the women, and not only like the vulnerable groups in our society, but also like we are oppressing ourselves as a country, because we are oppressing like ourselves with those hierarchical, asymmetrical relations. So we really need to keep like a critical thinking, and really trying to get those Mexican doctrines, principles, and things like that that we have in the legislation, that really come into the community and the individuals, and really talk about that we are trying to improve the well-being and bring peace to Mexicans and peace to every individual in the international context. So that will be it for my part, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Maria, for your beautifully presented about the role of Mexico in the construction of the international public law. And there are a number of questions. So out of many, there are important questions like it is a question from Subham Das. He's basically asking, the role of UN peacekeeping forces is declining day by day. It failed to stop some of the major wars that the world have been facing right now. So he's asking, what is your opinion on it?
Actually, the UN peacekeeping forces, I actually think that they are kind of violent, not only by some situations that keep happening by the UN peacekeeping forces as agents from that forces raping women, or just like stealing, trying to benefit from that. They are really violent because they are not considering the specific context of the conflict, of the countries where the conflict is happening. They just go, and their goal is really to end the conflict. But how would they end the conflict, and how would they protect the people if they don't ask what the people need, and what the people want, and what the people really need to end that conflict? So what the UN peacekeeping forces go and do is just like go and do what they consider best. So I'm not saying that it is wrong to try to help in these situations by any means that you have available, but what is wrong is actually not considering the people and trying to impose what you think it needs to be done in that context. So a way that in the UN peacekeeping forces can I don't know, regain this not I don't want to say power, because they shouldn't have power in this, but a way that the UN peacekeeping forces can just come back into the equation and really help the people is asking what the people want, how the people need to be helped, and not just like receiving people trying to resolve the issue without really having to resolve the issue. It's not their they shouldn't have the decision making power in those situations. So That will be my opinion.
Another question for you, the second and the last question. It is a question from SK Imran. He's asking, Mexico has relied heavily on the military to fight drug-related violence and organized crime, leading to the widespread human rights violations by military personnel. Between December 2012 and January 2018, the National Human Rights Commission received more than 4,600 complaints regarding alleged military abuses. From January to July 2019, it received 241 such complaints. What could be the action against those who step us?
Well, actually, I think I didn't hear the question completely because my internet was kind of glitching, and I can't find the question here. But the question that I understand you were asking me was about this. Well, these human rights violations by the police and by the state. So towards people that were detained in prisons and people that were deprived from their liberty. And yes, that is actually correct. We here and actually right now in the pandemic context, we are facing a lot of police. We have a lot of police repression of people. Actually, we have faced a lot of inconveniences and just human rights violation in the pandemic context. Like even before, we can talk about these violations even before the pandemic context. But I just want to mention this because this is still happening. This is the reality that we are facing right now in Mexico. We have a lot of repression by the police. Sometimes when we manifest for like, I don't know, any other right, we are repressed by violence, by the police. So this is actually what is happening right now, and you are absolutely correct by pointing that. And actually, that was what I was talking about. That we are like so eager to talk about these peaceful means of resolving conflicts in the international context and everything. But when it comes to really applying those principles and those doctrines to ourselves and really guaranteeing the well-being of our people, we really fail ourselves. We are really, well, the government really fails us as citizens in guaranteeing those kinds of those kinds of rights and those kinds of just like peace and well-being. So yeah, you're absolutely correct in pointing that. Is there any other questions?
Yes. Thank you, Maria. Thank you. You joined all the way from Canada. You enlightened us the role of Mexico in the construction of the international public law, and really we are grateful to you. And again, Maria, thank you for being with us. Paulette, Jordana is here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was really an honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Paulette, Jordana is here.
Yes, hello.
Yes, our next lecture is 130. It is going to be the fourth and the last lecture of this series, today's series. I welcome you, Paulette, Jordana. The title of this lecture is Reflection of Human Rights in the COVID-19 Pandemic. Paulette, Montserrat, Bermúdez, Jordana is the international human rights activist based in the University of Guadalajara, Mexico. I welcome you to the lecture series.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Jordana. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Well, as we know, the situation we are experiencing worldwide due to the COVID-19 pandemic has come to change our lives. We live every day under the threat of a highly contagious virus that we still do not know much about and that has been deadly to too many people around the world. This virus arrived without warning and came to change the circumstances in which we were living, presenting itself as a huge challenge for governments and, of course, for societies. This health challenge led to the application of new measures and restrictions in our daily lives. Today, I invite you to reflect from a human rights perspective on the situation we are experiencing and its effects on different groups. As we will know, one of the first and most emphatic recommendations of the WHO has been constant hand washing as a way to combat the spread of the virus. As privileged people, we might think that there is no greater problem in merely washing our hands constantly. Oh, but there is. Washing our hands implies having access to water, a condition that, unfortunately, not all people have access to. This situation led us to reflect, how is it possible that the vital liquid to exist, and which is an internationally recognized human right, does not reach everybody? According to UNICEF, in 2019, around 2.2 billion people worldwide do not have safely managed drinking water services. 4.2 billion people do not have safely managed sanitation services, and 3 billion lack basic hand washing facilities. Something as necessary as hand washing is a challenge for several populations globally, and doing it constantly seems unthinkable. This makes us realize that we are not only in conditions of economic inequality, but also health inequality, and that certain populations have a greater risk of being infected with COVID-19 due to the ineffectiveness of their governments to guarantee them one of the most important human rights that can exist and that is needed to survive on a daily basis: the access to water. On the other hand, another of the health authorities' recommendations is that of social distances. In some countries, they ask you to, in solidarity with the medical staff, not to leave your home if you can stay. And if you have to leave because the conditions do not allow you to stay at home, as happens with many people with limited resources, then you are asked to maintain social distance with other people. A good measure also to try to avoid contagion. But let's think about the people who are in prison. It is not new data that prisons in many cases are confinement spaces that exceed the capacity of the people for whom they are made. The conditions of many prisons often do not comply with the human rights standards, becoming spaces of confinement, unhygienic situations, and violation of several human rights. In the pandemic case, we know that incarcerated people are at greater risk of being infected by these situations. We must reflect and take measures that protect all people to guarantee their human right to health and to life. Rethink the incarceration of people who may have an alternative penalties and evaluate claims for prison benefits. Likewise, it is time to rethink the incarceration of people in preventive detention during this pandemic, considering alternatives such as house arrest, a situation in which the health of prisoners will be protected. As a consequence of this pandemic too, several states have declared states of emergency or curfews, thereby restricting some rights, such as the right of transit. This determination is totally legal, provided that, as the Inter-American Commission declares, it complies with the principles of proportionality and temporality, and must have as its legitimate purpose the strict fulfillment of public health objectives. States under police and security corporations must always take the human rights perspective into account when carrying out their functions, and must ensure that their actions are proportional to the action that prompts them. The health crisis should never serve as an excuse to injure the dignity of people. Next, I'm going to talk about the right to health, which must be guaranteed to all people. I know that this represents too complex a challenge. That is why we should focus on prevention. But once ill, all people have the right to health, and we must be cared for in public and private institutions if there is no possibility in public institutions. Furthermore, speaking of the right of health, this also refers to mental health. In the context of isolation, our interactions have changed, which has significantly affected us in the development of our mental health, which we must consider as a part of the integral right to health. The necessary measures must be taken to take care of our mental well-being as a human right. I want to reflect on the context in which one of the most important rights is found in my point of view. Due to the current situation, it has been taken as a decision in many countries to close the schools. In the best case, the classes are held online. In the worst case, the classes were stopped. The point is that although online classes are an alternative way of accessing education, we must think that, according to the World Bank in 2016, there were 4 billion people in the world who did not have access to the internet. What happens now that education can only be accessed through the internet? It is imperative for states to take measures that guarantee all girls and boys right to access education now through the internet. We must think of the internet as a basic tool necessary to guarantee this right of education, and measures must be taken in this regard. According to the United Nations, in Mexico, 257,146 girls, boys, and adolescents between the age of 7 and 17 years old did not have access to television, radio, or the internet, so they cannot study at this distance. At least a third of school-age children worldwide, a total of 463 million, did not have access to distance education when COVID-19 forced their schools to close. The COVID-19 pandemic increases educational inequality among children. It is a generational catastrophe that will lead to a delay of decades. Government decisions in the educational field will affect the future of millions of children and young people, resulting in the affectation of several other rights due to the principle of interdependence. Even when children have the necessary technology and tools at home, they cannot always study remotely through these platforms due to other factors that impede them, such as pressure to perform tasks around the home, the obligation to work, the precariousness of their learning environment, and the lack of help to use the study plans online or through audiovisual media. The remote learning reachability report highlights a significant inequality between regions. School-age children from sub-Saharan Africa are the most affected, as shown by the fact that half of all students in this region do not have the means to study remotely. In upper middle income countries, school-age children from the poorest households account for up to 86% of students without distance education access. Around the world, 3/4 of school-age children without access to this form of education live in rural areas. The effects of the pandemic are not the same for everyone. We must have an intersectional approach to understand what is happening in various parts of the world. We know that older people are at great risk of catching the virus and complicating the disease. But we must also take into account the significant risk that our children have. Leaving aside the lack of education that they are suffering, let's reflect on how the economic crisis that was unleashed by the virus affects them. The economic crisis affects us all, but some are more affected than others. In India and other countries in the region, the sale of boys and girls is still in use. In recent months, the desperate situation of many parents has led them to sell their children due to the lack of resources in their homes, which is a great problem and a great violation of children's rights. There are many other cases where children must abandon their insufficient distance education to start working and help ensure that food is not lacking at home. In recent months, there have also been increased cases of forced marriages. Families marry off their daughters to have one less mouth to support at home. Cases have been detected in which some minors as young as 12 years old were victims of human trafficking after a forced marriage. It is really worrying that girls and boys cannot develop in a family environment commensurate with their age. Girls are girls, not wives. Girls should study, not be forced to give birth. Children should play, not work in the cotton fields. Children should be happy and free, not merchandise or slaves. Finally, I would like to reflect on the state of women in this context. Women have the right to a life free of violence and free from all discrimination based on gender. Or at least, that is what it should be. Due to these sanitary measures that have been taken in some countries, the lives of many women are being affected. On the one hand, there is the problem of mothers who have to go out to work, but now also have to stay home to educate their children who are not going to school. There is a conflict when a family member falls ill, and women are the ones who have to take care of them, leaving aside their work and school obligations. But above all, during this pandemic, we have faced an increase in domestic violence due to the confinement in our homes. Early data show us that Singapore and Cyprus helplines have registered an increase of more than 30% in calls. In France, abuse cases increased by 30% since the start of the lockdown on March 17. In Argentina, calls for help due to the domestic violence had increased by 35% since March 20, when the quarantine began. This situation is alarming, since due to confinement, women are forced to shut themselves up at home with their abusers, which results in a greater risk of violence for them and a possible increase in feminicides in the countries. These issues should concern us since we live in countries where women, even before the pandemic, already suffered from severe violations of their rights, and their lives are increasingly put at risk. And well, as we see, we have many human rights issues on which we can reflect on the context of this pandemic. I chose this, but there are a lot more we can reflect on, like the situation of the migrants in this pandemic and their rights, the situation of the access to justice in this context, the conditions of the people with disabilities, among others. It will be up to you to reflect on these issues and the ones you think your region is going through. And I would like to thanks for this invitation. That will be all for my part. And I would like to hear your questions or discussions about these reflections on human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette, Jordana, for a nice presentation. Really, it is the need of the hour. The topic is very relevant in this context. There are so many questions. Out of many, I'll ask two questions. One from Dr. Bikram Kesejana is asking, how is an activist's life is so difficult, particularly in this pandemic, from any other profession in the global order? Please describe some of your own experiences. Activist's life in this global order.
Yeah, sorry, I was reading the question. How is the life of an activist?
Yes, okay.
Difficult? That's the question?
I think yes.
Okay, well, so it is difficult because in countries like Mexico, for instance, there are many violations on human rights defenders and the press and the people who defend human rights. So it's difficult when you try to defend some human rights, as for example the environment. There have been many people killed in my country because they are trying to protect the environment, they are trying to protect the water and health conditions, and there are some economic interests which with them interfere, so they have been killed. So it is difficult for that kind of situation, but it's something you must be passionate on and you have a compromise with. So I think the most difficult thing is the risk of your life, but it's a great profession and I like it.
Another question from Namrata Biswal is asking, how far the education system, like online classes, helpful for the students, for both high and low classes students during the pandemic period? Namrata Biswal is asking. Online classes, how it is helpful for the students?
Yeah, online classes are helpful actually because there is a possibility of have classes online and not just don't have classes anymore. So it's a good alternative, but we must keep in mind that not all people have access to the internet, and it is a situation of inequality because there are the poorest people and the people who live in the rural areas. They are the ones who are being kept away from the access to these tools. And we have the other people with better incomes that may be able to have this access to online education. But we are having a crisis when the inequality on education is being increasing due to this problem. So it's not that it's a bad tool, it's not that it's a bad idea, it's a good idea. The thing we should think of is how to make it accessible for all the people. And I think that's the main issue with this. Also, there should be more ways to educate ourselves in the context of the pandemic, not only online education. In many parts of the world, the restaurants and the bars are open, but schools are closed. And I think we should rethink of that, because education is one of the most precious rights we have, and is the priority of the kids, of the children, and also young people and people in universities. So we should rethink what is more important, if restaurants or schools. I think our kids should be learning in the presence of their teachers and should be with their fellow students, and they learn not only academic stuff, they learn about social stuff. So it's not that online education is bad, I think it's great, but we have to think further than that, and we have to make it accessible to everyone.
Last question to you. I think you can read out in the message box. SK Imran, he is asking, the human rights violations are mainly because of them, who creates a form of discrimination in the field of caste, creed and gender. Why we can't accept as a common race and religion as humanity?
Yeah, I also agree that a great violations of human rights happen because of discrimination. And yeah, it's because we as people discriminate in regards of race, sex, gender, religion, etc. But I think it's a difficult discussion to stop this discrimination. It is, of course, it is possible, but I think these discrimination are things we learn as children. I think we should embrace this issue through education not only at schools but at our homes. And I think we should see us all as part of the world and all of human race, just that human race. So yeah, the thing with discrimination is we need to take this issue from the educational part. And it's difficult because there have been several discussions about even human rights, because some people think, and I could agree with that human rights are the view of the Western countries. They are think with the view of the Western countries, and maybe sometimes they're trying to convince the other countries of their way of life. So it's a philosophical discussion, but I think through education and reflection, we could all get to some universal agreements.
I think there is no question for you. Is there any question for Paulette, Jordana? I think there is no question for you.
Yeah, I have a question, Mr.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Paulette. Well, congratulations. I think you're an amazing person. You and I, we met in the university here in Guadalajara. So I want to congratulate you first. And secondly, I want to ask you if you could share with us some of your solutions in this for people in disadvantage. As you and I, we know many people in disadvantage in this pandemic situation. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I didn't hear well recommendations about which issue in a specific, sorry.
Yes, for people in disadvantage, you know, like low-class persons or people in rural areas.
Yeah.
If you could share with us some solutions you have ever think about for them in this pandemic.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think there has to be some public policies that addresses these issues of human rights, not only in the context of the pandemic of COVID-19, but on a daily basis, because human rights should be guaranteed all the time. But this pandemic creates a crisis where we can see that these human rights violations are more evident nowadays. So I think governments should make public policies that work for everybody, and they should have in mind that all people is different, that their contexts are different. And I think the priority of governments right now should be the people in disadvantage and the people in rural areas. And it may be, we know that the classes are held online now, and we have the access to internet as a needed tool. Well, they should make that possible to the rural areas and the people who do not have access to that. And if they know that we have to wash our hands and constantly to make the virus disappear from our bodies, okay, so how will they give us access to everyone to water? Because we know we have a house and we have access to water, but what about the people who don't have it? What about the people who don't have electricity and they won't even have a computer either? There have to be different approaches for different situations. We cannot think in an equal manner to all the unequal people. So I think that is a responsibility of governments.
Thank you very much. I'm your fan.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much, Paulette. You joined all the way from Mexico and enlightened us about the very relevant topic of this time, reflection on human rights in the COVID-19 pandemic context. And we are really thankful and grateful to you. And thank you for being with us. Thank you, Paulette, Jordana. Over
Thank
to
you very much.
Rudranaran Das. Thank you so much. Over to Mr. Rudranaran Das.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lima. So today we are absolutely thrilled to announce that the formally vote of thanks to the panelists of Ranjitguru Memorial Series of International Webinar had successfully completed the 29th session. We have had some of the best academic activists, policymakers, journalists, judicial luminaries, and intellectual minds from across the globe, belonging to a wide range of academic fields and domains, sharing their valuable insights on contemporary subjects to provide and unpack the complexities embedded in a post-pandemic world. We take this opportunity to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all the esteemed panelists who have wholeheartedly agreed to join this platform and share their experiences, work, and ideas with young and aspiring minds. We truly and genuinely value their time and support that we have received unconditionally. We are also equally grateful to our participants who have turned out in large numbers despite issues of connectivities and digital divide. We want to recognize their hunger for knowledge and to learn from scholars of national and international repute. Last but not the least, we would like to thank our logistic team of the Department of History and Political Science, Jawaharlal Nehru College, Kuanpal, Cuttack, for making this platform and taking a lead to hosting the event with close association with Center for Adivasi Research and Development. This whole initiative has been a brainchild of Dr. Vikram Kesari Jena, Director, CARD, who truly believes in dreaming big, and he wanted to ensure the students from small villages coming from the interior and rural areas of Odisha get to hear some of the most influential minds. Rightly mentioned by our mentor, if problem arises, engage yourself in read, write, and speak, and listen. The art of avoid all problems, the pandemic also not impacting us due to critically enhanced knowledge, to conducting the marathon webinar series, and dream big. This has been a sole purpose behind initiating the event. Once again, we thank each and every stakeholders of this platform for their support, motivation, and encouragement, without which we wouldn't have been able to reach more than 129th sessions. Thank you today for celebrating world record highest virtual talks in a single platform. We have witness for all four with us. CARD for promoting the empirical research and policy for social change among tribal communities to save their nature, culture, language, and identity. Thank you all to join us for celebrating our success. Wishes you a happy and prosperous new year 2020 and a COVID pandemic free year. Thank you all for Thank you to Dr. Lima for moderating this session, and thank you our respected guests from abroad. Now, good night to all. The meeting is concluded now. Thank you all.